This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. I'm in Minneapolis, Minnesota for this episode of the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast, a city that I come to every year because we host the Minnesota Craft Beer Festival here at the Minneapolis Convention Center and have for, 7 years or something now. Sitting across from me here in this bunker deep under the Idyll Forest of Minneapolis is Jeremy Pryes from Pryes Brewing and Idyll Forest, the mixed culture, spontaneous, lambic-inspired side brand of Pryes. Welcome to the podcast, Jeremy.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
And this, to find quiet space, we were in Idyll Forest, which is a separate offsite location, which is basically your mad scientist lab for making spontaneous, wild, and otherwise cultured beers here. Yeah, it's
when you look at something like this, and when you want to start, if you look at the difference between like we'll call it a clean brewery versus a brewery that welcomes foreign bacteria, you really do have to separate those two worlds.
You decided to channel the feel of Brussels and put it in this kind of gritty industrial building here, a good 20 minutes away from the main brewery itself. So there's no cross contamination capability. But at the same time, you've outfitted it well. We've got fooders around us. We've got tanks with fruit macerating in them. It's a significant little project here for you, for a side project of Pryes. It's quite a little laboratory that you've built here. Anyway, we're gonna talk about your process for making these beers that are fruit and then acidity focused and culture focused and fermentation focused, and the way that all of those things intersect in a whole variety of different ways. Blending is a big piece of what you do here, but we're also going to talk a little bit about the Pryes side of things, because that's also your name on that brewery. And, we'll probably talk about the thing that caught my eye the most as I stepped into the tap room earlier today, which was the idea of Midwest IPA, because your Miraculum is a Midwest IPA, proudly proclaimed as such on the tap board. And since we're here at the very top of the Midwest in Minneapolis, I think that bears talking about. And so a little bit of IPA, a little bit of spontaneous, lambic inspired, mixed culture conversation throughout here. I'm looking forward to it. Anyway, we're gonna talk about all these things, but first, G&D Chillers. They always strive to build great chillers. Partner with them as you build great beer, but don't just take it from me.
Hey, this is Josh Erickson of Jafuncta Brewing in Mandeville, Louisiana. The team at G&D were a critical part of our 10X expansion, always just a phone call or email away. And thanks to their superior equipment, technology, and documentation, commissioning our new chiller was smooth and straightforward. Now we can't wait until we need to upgrade our existing chiller.
That's right. Choose G&D Chillers on your next expansion or brewery startup and receive 1 free year of remote control and monitoring of your new G&D chiller. And ProBrew is the industry partner that brewers trust to take their operations to the next level, especially when it comes to canning their product for distribution. By partnering with ProBrew, brewers can fill and seam their canned product. It ranges from 100 to 600 cans per minute. Their unique filling process also ensures low dissolved oxygen pickup and focuses on product quality during the entire process. For more information, visit probrew.com or email them at contactus@probrew.com. ProBrew, brew your beer. Also, you might have heard of Old Orchard, but have you heard of their newest flavors? Berry Blend, Blood Orange, Lemonade, and Tart Cherry are the latest additions to their lineup of flavored craft juice concentrate blends. Old Orchard's R&D team can also formulate custom blends unique to your needs. To learn more and request your free samples, head on over to oldorchard.com/brewer. All right, Jeremy, we normally start this off with a little bit of background. Tell me yours.
I got into craft brewing. It's kind of a accumulation of things that have happened throughout my life. I started my early ages of, between like 13 to 18 or 19, just lived in basically the restaurant world, being a cook at various places and really getting a taste for flavor. At that point, then I went to college. I went to college for graphic design initially. And then I came out of there working more of IT background. So I got a job with Apple. long story short, worked for a bunch of technology companies. And at the end of it, I really felt like I just was missing that, like, that experience or creating something for somebody to enjoy. And I was just doing such, just computer work, just sitting in front of a screen and losing your sight, So I just really started trying to get back into restaurants. And I started just, obviously I'm from the Midwest. And so I drink, it's part of my everyday. Mostly every day, and flavor. And so really when you combine the two, which is kind of doing computers and doing cooking, you have like a strategic, basically creating something through processes. And it kind of made sense for me to kind of, keep going this direction.
And so you started off with a Pryes at a kind of incubator of sorts.
Yeah. So then through there, I actually started I started brewing beer. There was a brewery here in Minneapolis at that time. It's now closed, but it's called Lucid. And me and several other breweries, just at certain times would go there, and it was called a dual prop. And so these laws got changed so that you could actually use somebody's equipment for that day. And so you would buy your own materials, you would brew the beer, you would send it, you'd cellar it, and then you'd package it, and then you would go sell it, and then you go deliver it, and you would just basically dual proprietorship on their system. And so I built the brand Pryes, and I would slowly get to more accounts. And then all of a sudden, after doing that for about 3 years, I just couldn't do it all myself anymore. And so then at that point, we just approached the banks and showed that our proof of concept was successful. And we got some loans, and then we looked for places. And if you talk to anybody that has looked or tried to start a brewery, the single worst thing to ever deal with is finding real estate, because you're like, I want to go here. And they're like, oh, what do you want to do? You want to build a brewery? And this is also, this is about 10 to 12 years ago. And so what happened is people are like, at this point in the kind of like the history of beer, everybody's talking about craft beer, which is awesome. And there was like, oh, you want this? Well, now it's $10 a square foot. And you're like, what do you mean? Like, I don't know where you lie on this one. So we eventually found a developer that really enjoyed what we did and felt for our cause, and they owned a bunch of properties, and we went through a lot of them. And after like not taking 40 different properties, we found that we were like, literally we would just tour a place, get the design done, and then go to the next place and the next place. And we were so aggressive that me and my one of my co-founders, we would actually just go into businesses and be like, hey, it's getting really expensive to be downtown Minneapolis. Maybe you want to find a building somewhere else, And so we were just trying as hard as we could
to talk other people out of their locations.
Trying to. And then one opened up, and it was just at that point on the skirts of downtown Minneapolis. And we just walked in and we saw the vision, and it had great ceilings, and it's only a mile and a half down from the water treatment plant. And the next thing's that we opened up Pryes Brewing and just got done with our second huge expansion. And so we're just really happy with how the journey is. And, it's just, it's awesome. We're happy with how things happen, and it's a slow, thoughtful process. And, we're really happy for it.
It's a cool spot. Obviously, great little pizza kitchen, plenty of beer, good outdoor seating, and, in a big space. I mean, it is a big, big tap room now at Pryes. It's ambitious.
Yeah. We've been told that it's the largest or the second largest facility for its type in the state, which is really fun. We've divided that area based upon production. I should have said right away, Pryes Brewing is a production facility. It's not a brew pub. So we've got all the equipment and the fooders and a sizable production space, which is basically about half as big as the tap room is. And really, it's just really not about its size. It's really about providing the spaces in the tap room for people to come in and find a place to sit down and enjoy themselves. And it's really about hospitality and just people understanding that, we're a local business and all the things. And just like everything else, when you come in and you buy a beer, you're supporting staff that lives here. And, it's all brewed with Minneapolis water, and you're right on the banks of the historic Mississippi River, just in the outskirts of downtown Minneapolis. And it's fun.
The city's kind of grown in towards you too over that time too. It seems like there's more and more people in that North Loop area. And, and so it's not as far out as it might once have been.
No, it has surpassed us. We are waiting right now. For example, there's free parking on the road that we're waiting until it's gone, because it's going to happen.
Yeah. Anyway, so, we always, always love to, kind of pull apart the idea of, the beer that you're going to make. You start this, you as a dual prop getting started, you almost have a laboratory to figure out what people want from you. And then you have to find this intersection of what you like to make and what people want to buy from you and drink from you. Hopefully those things align in some way that makes sense, so that you feel fulfilled in what you're doing. Was there an initial beer idea behind Pryes beyond just, I want to brew beer? What was some of the beer that you really, had a vision to make?
Well, the beers that at this point, you're looking at, about 10 to 12 years ago. So what happened is during that historic time, it was after, like I was talking, it's after like the Ranger and the Torpedo. So like lots of like, wet hop beers, or just, I would say IPAs that had really good balance and flavors to them, bright flavors. And then after that, in the timeline was the IBU wars, when everybody was having like a 300, this is 300 IBUs, At that point, what really happened to me as even a home brewer is that I had like this palate fatigue. And so everything I was drinking was just getting more IBUs and more IBUs and more bitter. And so I thought something that I wanted to do, and kind of like how Miraculum came about, is to really kind of take those like West Coast IBUs that were kind of like flushing over the country and looking at the East Coast. And I was like, I'm going to make this like kind of like more like a foodie beer. And so in the IPA realm. And so I kind of just, it's a Midwest IPA. And what's a Midwest IPA? Well, it really just takes a lot of those, those hops that are from the West Coast, along with some darling hops. And at that point, Simcoe had just came out like a couple of years prior, and I was a huge Simcoe fan, and taking like the Cascades and the Centennials and making that work, and then balancing that out.
It's got to have Centennial if it's going to be a Midwest IPA, doesn't it?
It absolutely has to. Like I was growing Centennial in my backyard, and it just took over my backyard. But just really doing that, and then having like a really nice malty backbone to kind of balance it. So when you're looking at the adaption of people in Minneapolis really starting to drink Miraculum, it was really just like the cooks. You'd use it for things. I mean, when you're looking at
they could actually cook with this IPA.
You could cook with it.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Can't do that with a lot of IPAs.
That's right. Because of the malty backbone and kind of how it was kind of, balanced, they would just do pairing things. They would pair it with like spicy sausage and pizza and burgers, and like it was just a big thing. And so culturally it was like, it came into like the underground beer, and then eventually it just kind of like stayed there and has a place for it. And I'm really proud of it.
Well, I want to dig into what actually makes a Midwest IPA, what the true real foundations are for it. Before we do that, streamline efficiency with Omega Yeast's Diacetyl Knockout Series. The DKO series is comprised of 8 familiar yeast strains engineered to knock out the formation of diacetyl before it starts. The strains now better, available now from made-to-order pitchables at any volume. Contact Omega Yeast today at omegayeast.com. Also, ABS Commercial has been a full-service brewery outfitter for over 10 years. They're proud to offer brewhouses, tanks, keg washers, and preventative maintenance parts to brewers across the country, as well as equipment for distilling, cider making, wine making, and more. They know the ins and outs of the brewing and installation process and can design the perfect setup for you, whether you're just starting out or looking to expand. Contact them today at sales@abs-commercial.com to discuss your customized brewery needs. ABS Commercial, we are brewers. So Jeremy, I'm going to guess, and this is just a wild guess, I'm going to guess that the recipe for Miraculum has changed and evolved over the last decade. But the idea of Midwest IPA has to, kind of underpin that, even as context changes for people. And so rather than track where it's been, maybe highlight some of the kind of key shifts over the last decade, in your mind, and then, what it looks like now, how you define the idea of Midwest IPA today, maybe starting with grist and then moving up from there.
Yeah. So back when it first started, it was much more, because everything was really about flavor back then. And then West Coast IPAs were like, their flavors were probably just like hops, like how many barrels, how many can I throw in this one? And this one didn't have that as a bold. And so initially the Simcoe would provide like this really nice original Simcoe flavor. Now I say that because Simcoe is not the Simcoe that's today. Simcoe used to be more woody, more garlicky, more like cat piss kind of flavors, and had more of that dankness. And now it's definitely being picked a little bit earlier, and now it's more fruity, and it's kind of being bred now for like hazies and whatnot. So just imagine that kind of flavor along with that.
Is that good or bad? Huh?
I mean, when I do hop selection, I have to go through many plugs to get it. I'm like, this is not the right hop. I'm like, because for all the people that do hop selection, you're not just picking a hop. They're like, this hop's amazing. When you have a brand that you've been making for 10 years, I mean, you are literally picking the hop that is the best represented by the brand that you have. And so I want Miraculum. There's a Simcoe that I need, and if I don't get that, then I'm in trouble. And so I just keep going through all these plugs looking for this, and then I get it, and then I'm like, whew, next brand. And so that's kind of how that goes. But yeah, so it started earlier out. It had this really finessey, really nice malt. So your typical West Coast beers have like, small, about a crystal malt. Back then I used crystal malt. Not crystal malt, Castle malt and Paul's Light. And so it was just a really nice beer with very light caramel notes, but didn't have a lot of sweetness to it. It was just really nice passive. And then through just what happens in the world, those malts were just really hard to get. Like all of a sudden, like, I don't know, something happened. This is a long time ago, by the way. But like all of a sudden, like something happened with the shipper, and then all of a sudden nobody could get it. And so it kind of forces you within the quantities that you're doing and the quantities that you need to produce, that you have to make decisions. And so then you kind of adapt new things and you find different things. At my brewery, I really like environment malts. And so a lot of my stuff is that, but it doesn't mean they're all that. So I like to, jump away from the curve and do other things. And so
you're here in Minneapolis. It's the home of BSG and Shakopee,
right.
Just outside of Minneapolis here.
Yeah. Like what's also funny about that too is if I need something quick, I can just go drive to get it. Like Shakopee is only, 40 minutes away or half an hour away, where, if you're getting stuff on like the East or West Coast, that's just unfortunately can't happen. But so, it's nice to be around BSG. They have been a really good partner of ours to grow with, and they understand our growth, and it's been really great with them. But the malt has changed a little bit based upon what we selected to do. Hops are defined by selection based upon what we select that best represents the style of beer that people are used to. Because as brewers, it's our responsibility to give people the same experience with something that they like, whether that's just like the type of malt or, using our craftship to make it represent what they want and what we love too. And so throughout the time, I would say that if we fast forward a little bit through malt problems and whatever, we kind of kept the same grist percentages, I would say. And then some of those sweetness that we have in a crystal malt has dissipated. They have been taken out because that's what the flavor is. And it's funny because people say that you brew beer for the consumer, but like you also bring it for yourself. And this is what we say all the time. But you also find that your tastes are changing too. And you love basically what that brand expresses to you. And so you just keep it alive. And then you kind of go through this thing where you kind of modernize it a little bit. And so the hops that, go into these IPAs that used to be like traditionally you'd have 60, 45, or probably just 60, 30, 15, 10, whatever. All those things kind of slowly got pushed down to the whirlpool because people want, instant expression right away. I want the fruitiness. And then all of a sudden what happens after as of like 5 or 6 years ago is like, I call it like the invention of cold brew, right? So like you kind of notice that when people were drinking coffee, they weren't really drinking black coffee anymore. They were just, adding stuff. And then basically generationally speaking, people went to cold brew. And what is cold brew? It's anti-bitterness. And so what happens to that, it follows into their drinking. And so now people went to, which is, in my opinion, the creation of the hazy IPAs, an anti-bitterness beer or anti-isomerization beer. And so everything got pushed to the kettle or to the whirlpool and cool down and whatnot. And so Miraculum's kind of taken some of those influences, and some of those hops have been pushed now into the whirlpool. And what you kind of get rid of in that note is that you get rid of kind of like that, like that, we'll call it like that crude oil that you need to make a West Coast. Like you start having, if everything's in the whirlpool, you kind of get rid of that like backbone or the soul of the hops. And so I try to keep that back, try to hold that on to and keep Miraculum to where it is. And I think we've done a really good job at realizing what Miraculum means to people and making the people that have invested 10 years, into it. And we think we're doing pretty well.
It's interesting to think about how this increasing dryness in the beer with less crystal malt is also a function of the increasing bitterness and these pieces moving together.
That's right.
And I love thinking about it in that same kind of context. And, we talk about all the time in the podcast that, people's palates are constantly in flux. They're in much more, their context is always changing because the food we eat and the other things that we drink, cold brew coffee, great example of that. These change the way that we approach even, the flavors of beer itself. And so, it's almost counterintuitive to think, oh, well, the beer got a little drier as we pulled out some of these sweeter malts, but it got a little bit drier because it didn't need all of that sweetness to balance out all, because the bitterness dialed back so much.
That's right.
Well, but at the same time, you still want body. So how do you achieve that kind of idea of body and fullness, within this, now that there's less, or maybe even no, caramel malts or crystal malts in these?
Well, I'm a graduate of the American Brewers Guild. And so one of the classes or the areas is just engineering. And so I'm really happy that I took the approach to being able to do step mashes on my system. I feel that it really allows me the control to do what I want and make the expression be more true versus just, having single infusions. I think that our malt our malt can work on single infusions totally fine, but it doesn't give you the capabilities and the allow to change your mash steps so that you can create an expression or create your body or whatever your step is to do to, whether or not you want to thin it out or, beta or whatever you want to do. And so, we've done it by changing the mash schedule. We have used some dextrin malt just to, make that back go up and make some more body and just,
under 5%, I'm sure.
Well, it's definitely it's probably under 5%. It's hard to always remember all the beers that we do because they are two different brains. And so right now I'm like in IPA world, which I just brewed today, but it's different when I go between here and Idyll Forest. And so some of the exacts are hard, but I can tell you generally what goes through my head when we're doing stuff.
Cool. So then, what is it about the step mash that you adjust in order to kind of, promote more bodybuilding?
Yep. So we skip over the low. So we basically just do a straight into, I think we do like 153 or 152. So we basically jump over beta. And then we just go into the later highs. Basically what's doing is in turn creating higher sugars so that they won't be the lower strain sugars aren't being eaten up by Saccharomyces so much. So we just really just mash in a little bit later, do flame out. I know we'd have another step in there, but yeah, so basically just the mash.
What's your goal for finishing gravity on Miraculum?
Final gravity. It's an interesting subject because this was actually used to be based upon 07. So we used to use a dry English yeast. And what happens is for anybody that brews with that, which is 07, is it has a really hard time. I think seasonally, it's not proven, but I think it seasonally has a hard time finishing and it's temperamental. And so while I love how much it attenuates and I love how it flocks, it's a great yeast. Living with it has been just always a yearly challenge. And so since then, just to really kind of look at the gravity, we started really experimenting by using Chico and just seeing how that goes. And so while 07 was putting us in a final gravity of 302, Chico's allowing us to be at 1.8 to 1.2. And so we're definitely drying it out more. And it's been this, and Chico's not the end all. It's just through trials because Chico also flocks a lot less. And so in the production world, you end up getting a lot less. And so it's just a little bit of problems.
So that's an interesting one then. If it's getting there, then you're probably also dialing back some of the bitterness again too, if it's getting that much drier at the same time.
That's also true. It is a match. It is a balance. It is a sensory based upon a team giving our feedback to it. I mean, we put a lot of time in the brewery into a lot of these things. So I'll brew it, I'll go to the cellar, then the cellar will take over. And then at the end, we're just always trying to make things balanced, always trying to make things, how do we feel that Miraculum staying on its own will be? And it's been really cool, just knowing the history of a thing that feels like it's living.
Sure. So this beer really is getting close to that amber in color. There's What else is in there? There's definitely, some more malt character than just, 2-row based malt in there.
So Miraculum really, obviously we're in Minneapolis, and so we get our base malt from RAR. And so that's our 2-row. And then we are true to our West Coasty styles. And so we put Munich in there. And then we use Carahel for a little bit of, we'll call it a little bit of the entry into it. And then we put some Cara Amber in there to give a little bit of that sweetness, because what's nice about that is it doesn't have our crystal kind of flavor, which has more of a peakness. And then for a nice coloring, then we do the Carafa too. So that gives us our nice color and definition for the beer. So
it's a lot of color. It's fun to not be afraid of color in your IPA these days.
Right. Everything kind of looks the same.
It's kind of fun. Anyway, we also, and then you've talked about this. Now you're fermenting with Chico, but let's talk about that hop blend. You mentioned that Simcoe is a big deal for this, and that kind of captures a lot of this. And then Cascade and Centennial are part of it. But also, again, you're taking that kind of, I wouldn't call it old school, but that kind of classic approach to building a blend, so that as the agronomics change year to year, you're going to maintain this kind of consistency and flavor to that. Or there's some other pieces that kind of come in and out in a given year based on the way that hops move in various ways.
Yeah, I think a big thing that people really have to understand is that hop selection is a privilege to do it. It means so much. If we were just to get random Simcoe, it would just be this fruity thing that kind of puts us into this this new West Coasty hazy kind of cold IPA realm. So what I do is, my darling hop to be able to support the malt bill that I have for Miraculum is really Simcoe. When I look at bringing in kind of like the more West Coast citrusy, that kind of tropicalness, I think the Cascade and Centennial are just true to the style. And I think that it's required. And I think that it really brings that citrusy note that I love West Coast, which is, in my opinion, always coming back again. And I think that together they just create this this perfect beer. When I'm somewhere, just me, I'm surrounded by beer all the time. If I'm say I'm at a friend's house and they've got Miraculum, it's just my go-to. I don't even know why. I'm oh, I got a Miraculum, I'll take that. It's just, it's mine. It's I'm really excited about it and I love it. And it kind of, in the American realm of, beer offerings, it's my go-to. It's who I identify with. It's weird to say.
No, it makes sense, but it also fits in that same kind of vibe as your Two Hearted. These are celebration. These are beers that are also, they're not supposed to be the sharpest, the tightest. They're supposed to be comfortable. This is stretchy sweatpants instead of your hot your leather super tight skinny pants or skinny jeans or whatever those are. This is it kind of sums up that sturdy Midwest approach.
It's a liquid jacket in the colder months.
There you go. But you also brew West Coast, a beer or more IPAs that you define as West Coast, and you mark them differently on your menus. How do those differ then from something like this Miraculum?
They're more cutting edge. They're they use strata. They use the hops that are more like the darling people hops that people talk about. There's really no crystal malt or any colored malt in them. There is a little bit just for finesse and for some change and for some malt complexities, but that's not really what West Coast is being defined for anymore. And so I think that when you're looking at the spectrum of things, they both stand out together in their own way and to the own consumer. And so there's definitely a need for them. And I think that the West Coast beer is, heavily influenced by the hazy. And we're in just a really interesting time, in my opinion, where, how many other things can you do to an IPA now? You have, everything from dip hopping to fermenter hops, which just kind of was a thing 5 years ago now. And, a lot of these things are staying in practice. And, maybe new things will come out and you'll adapt and enjoy the process of doing it. And so you'll adapt to what you normally do and, life will go on.
My perspective on this year, even yesterday, before I flew out here to Minneapolis, I wrote about 40 or 50 editor reviews for the new IPA issue of the magazine, tasting through beers, writing, our judges have already judged and scored things, and I go back through and write my editor's thoughts on those same things, just to kind of round out their opinions. And so Obviously, I don't score the beers. All the scores go blind from our blind panel. But it's fascinating for me to, taste 40 or 50 of these beers in one day in a context like that, and also try to think about how to pull apart the differences in those. And I mean, you're right. There is a lot of sameness going on, but at the time, like, it actually highlights some of the really interesting things that are going on out there, especially more, heavily terpene focused, where, this kind of focus on super dank, unapologetically dank, kind of fun and interesting. And especially after you have 30 or 40 Citra Mosaic IPAs, hazy or West Coast, or heavily thiol focused, with gobs and gobs of Nelson. Like, there's a lot of those out there too. But it was interesting to, come across beers, with like a, Chardonnay or Venice character to them, and, within, using strata hops even. Interesting to see folks getting different kinds of flavor results in that. And, I obviously naturally find myself attracted to that because, in the sea of sameness, you want to find those things that stand out. So interesting to look at this whole context of IPA, even though, there's the ongoing West Coast versus, hazy kind of, faux beef going on. They're really more alike, as you say, than a lot of people want to admit they are now.
Yeah. And it's also like, you look at the hop growers and you're looking at what they're coming out with. And when you just look at the new stuff, it's always fruity. Like, there's no like, it's like, well, what other kind of fruit can you imagine in the hop now? They're like, don't you get mangoes? I'm like, yeah, but that's a different, oh, never mind. Or like, you want pineapple? I'm like, yeah, but I get that. Okay, I guess we have another pineapple. Like, how much more fruity can you make a fruity hop to be a fruity? And really, how do those kind of like bring into the styles of an IPA? I mean, you're really kind of focused on just a couple of the styles that, do the style guidelines.
I was laughing about it because our judges loved a beer that used Sabro. And, obviously it's a polarizing thing, but you can certainly see how in a context of, 20 beers that all have a lot in common, they're like, oh, there's something that's a little different. Like, oh, that's, anyway, I could go on and talk about that forever. But I think we've talked enough about IPA, and I want to shift gears and maybe talk about your fruit forward beers, your acid forward beers, your fermentation forward beers, especially here in the context of Idyll Forest, because that's where we're sitting right now. Before we do that, this episode is brought to you by Yakima Chief Hops. Interested in all things hops and beer, join Yakima Chief Hops on August 28th through 30th for Hop and Brew School, a one-of-a-kind educational experience in Yakima, Washington, the heart of hop country. Experience the thrill of hop harvest, tour multi-generation hop farms, walk through processing facilities, and attend panel sessions with industry leaders. Register at hopandbrewschool.com. Use code CBB10 for a 10% discount off of your tickets. And if you're a brewer who's also interested in distilling, subscribe now to the Craft Spirits and Distilling podcast, available on all of your favorite podcast platforms. Hosted by Sydney Jones, head distiller for Few Spirits in Chicago, and Molly Troop, master distiller for Freeland Spirits in Portland, Oregon. This podcast explores the technical and creative processes behind great spirits through conversations with some of the leading distillers working today. It's everything you love about the Craft Beer Brewing podcast, but focused on distilling. Click on the link in the show notes and give it a listen. All right, Jeremy, let's talk about Idyll Forest. I had not heard of this brand until last year when I was at Fobob in Chicago, and all of a sudden this brand that I had never heard of before, that as I looked it up after you won 2 medals, a silver and a bronze in the kind of wild beer category, right behind Tanya Cornett, who took number 1, also was recently named Russell Share Award winner this year. A phenomenal brewer and a great company, amazing company to be in. So that was my first entree with Idyll Forest, the first kind of visibility for this brand, but it's something you've been working at for a while. So, tell me the Idyll Forest story.
When it really kind of comes down to like making IPAs and all the other, we'll call them clean beers, or like imagine if you were somewhere and they're like, hey, here's a mango flavored blonde, right? And then you try it and you're like, oh yeah, I can taste the mango and it's a blonde. But does it really taste like a mango? Like, does it really have that flavor of real things? And so when you kind of look at the depths of flavor, it really utilizes like lambic beers and understanding that, that kind of like barnhouse or the level of barnhouse or those things really pay like a huge way into creating flavor, and whether or not you put a bunch in or whatever. And so kind of, it set me on a path to start traveling and going to Belgium. And so I was like, Belgium beer, let's go do this, And so I traveled to Belgium, and through the technologies, I reached out to a lot of different breweries in Belgium, and everybody was really open to have me come and hang out for a while, and for them to tell me their story, and sit with people and just hear how they're doing it, and before you know it, you have a lot more in common with people around the world than you ever anticipated, and so you become friends with these people, like they're like people that you talk to every day, and because we have, Facebooks and all these things and WhatsApp and all these other things that you never had to use before. And then also when you're trying beers with them, to talk. And I think one thing that was really fascinating that I had with my friend Thomas is that when we try through like lambic beers and we talk about them, that we share a lot of the same palates. Like, it's interesting that when you try something, you're like, I get this out of it, or I don't get this out of it, and I like this or I don't like it. When you find somebody that you identify with, you have a lot more conversations, and you have a lot more in common than just like, I like baseball, I like football. You start talking about, really nerding out. And so then you talk about processes and stuff, and it just really intrigued me.
I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love nerding out on these things.
Yeah. I don't, it's just like, I'm sure everybody in their professional world, they do it in their own way. This just happens to be mine, and I couldn't be happier and more proud to be in it. And these relationships, and seeing, especially when you're looking at some of the oldest beer in the world, traditions, and how that turns into expression and how that turns into friendship. It's an incredible thing to be a part of. And so that just kept pushing me and urging me to go. And it's really about how my personal questions were about how to achieve flavor. How is this happening? How is this the most amazing thing? Why doesn't everybody like this? Why am I the only person? And so when I kind of found myself surrounded by people like me, I was like, hey, everybody, let's talk. And then basically when I kept hearing, these traditional stories, me coming from a clean background, going to school for brewing and doing all these things, I have lots of fundamental ways that I brew beer that I stick to. And then I was like, I'm going to push this note. I'm going to make things that while I've had wine hybrids, I haven't had them like this. I haven't blended like this. Or while people have like ciders, I'm like, have they had ciders like this? Well, what if I go to an orchard? What if I spend the whole day picking apples? What if I take that and take the bacteria on it, which there are cideries that do that? What if I take this and what if I blend it with lambic? What if I or lambic inspired beer? Or what if I do this? What if I try to note and blend towards a certain flavor that I haven't had before, And so what are my options? What are my fruits? What can I do? Am I going to constrain myself to just local? Am I going to go through the world and find things to make things that are unique expressions that people can enjoy? I really kind of found myself back into that like cooking phase where I could create something. And since I had a technical ability of process, I was like technically cooking again, And so I just kept going. I wanted more and more of it. And I just kept figuring out more and learning more. And it was like reading a good book, except that book, took a long time, because these beers take a really long time. And how can I naturally do it? How can I do it in a way that, learn bottle conditioning, learn your things, talk to breweries. Some breweries are open now. Some breweries are not, and that was kind of what kept pushing me. And when I started creating new flavors and sharing those flavors, I started getting really cool reactions. And the last time that I felt that was when I started home brewing, and I started doing that. And so I really got addicted to the science behind it, the history behind it, the flavors that I'm able to present, the individual expression that makes it so that I know this is hard. You can't even, like, if I do these things annually, next year's just not going to taste like it. So that there's this organic feel. I think one thing that's really beautiful about spontaneous and getting into the cool ship world is it's really a celebration about the day. Like if I cool shipped tomorrow, it's going to be different than today. And those things are fascinating. That world, that war that happens in the barrel, and the outcome and the weight, the anticipation for what it's going to be like. It's like you can't even, there's nothing like that. And like, You know, when we're making clean beers and IPAs, I know my job at that point is to make the same thing. But in this world, it's not. It's about pushing it and making it go and seeing the difference, like a fine wine. In fact, they are kind of like wines, you know, and they're but they're still beer.
I have one question I want to get out of the way before we move on to some of the technical process. You know, you have been spinning up this Idyll Forest now, like, because you're also a business owner.
Yeah.
And, you know, while it is great to be driven by the creative possibilities within this sphere of making, you also need to sell beer that you make. And there's certainly, you know, the tides seem to be against that style of beer in general. How do you square those two pieces up right now?
You know, everything requires attention. What's nice about dealing with this and what this is I'll tell you what this is not. This is not putting it in a barrel and sitting in the back corner, right? You can't do this properly if you do that. You have to get attention. So what does that mean? That means that I have to be the person that does this in my time. And that means that Pryes is my number one. It is the support for this to happen. And so that gets the most of my attention. And this happens after I'm done doing that. And so I try to balance the two because, like I said, this requires attention. And so I do Pryes. So I brew at Pryes. I do a lot. We just, you know, run a brewery. And then this is when I'm done with that or done with my day. So typically, like right now, I get up at about 4:30 in the morning. I don't know if you want to hear this, but I get up at 4:30 in the morning. I start my dough in at 6 o'clock. I get done at 2. I then come to Idyll Forest and I come here till about 5. And then I pick up my kid and then I turn into a dad for the rest of the night and then I repeat it. And then I find, and then things happen and you just adjust and you make sure that you prioritize. And so, you know, if that's not, you know, making sure or, you know, investing time in a relationship or, you know, maybe it's label time, maybe it's blending time, maybe it's bottle conditioning time, maybe like you just, the thing that dictates a lot of this stuff is that, you know, in this world, when you put stuff, if it's time to pick the cherries, you go pick the cherries and you got to figure out how to do it, you know? And so it's just my weeks are very interesting.
11-hour days sounds like a fun job, Jeremy. But we'll put that work-life balance question aside for right now, and let's talk about, you know, what, you know, your process then at Idyll Forest, because Idyll Forest as the brand idea encompasses different lanes of beer. You know, there you have we're sitting next to your cool ship, or actually it's right behind me right now. And you have a cool ship that's inside this bunker where you bring in outside air through a fan right above us, so that when you do cool ship beer in here, you know, it is getting inoculated by outside air. And you've got, you know, oak, like a almost skeleton frame of barrel staves that you can lay on top of it to kind of, you know, help along that process of culture evaporating, you know, leaving sugar on the oak and then, you know, precipitating back down into, you know, the cooling wort itself. You know, you've definitely built this process for making spontaneously fermented beer here. But you also have lots of different cultures going. You're maintaining cultures in foeders. You're maintaining cultures in barrels. You've got carboys full of cultures, you know, and so there's also this kind of cultured approach where you're maintaining these and creating, you know, beers through mixed fermentation that aren't spontaneous per se, but are also following that. And like you mentioned, you're also, you know, focusing on fruit fermentations, cider, and taking a quote unquote natural, even though that term is so loaded, natural, you know, like, thank you, natural wine people for ruining that term. But talk about, you know, what the project entails, and if there's some kind of, you know, lanes that some of these beers find themselves into, even if they cross over lanes at specific times, you know, and how you think about creating, whether that's process driven, whether that's end flavor result that you're then blending towards in order to achieve, because it sounds like your creative process actually works in both of those kinds of dimensions.
Yeah, the way I kind of see this is I want all the flavors, right? The way I see it is it's really about individual expression. And in order for me to do something and say that this said fruit, or say there's a flavor that I just want to get out and I taste it maybe in a barrel, or maybe I taste it eating something, or, based upon my experiences, or even visually, right? Because we've got a lot of different fruit all around the world that we can celebrate. And so what I do is I kind of see this on a back note as being like a flavor library, right? So I have mixed culture, I have spontaneous, I have them in different locations. And when you try them, even if it's the same, say, we'll just take it on the easiest thing. Say we have the same thing, we have the same lab, Brett, whatever, right? And so if you put those in two different barrels and then you give it food or whatever you want to do is your inspired lambic base, golden or red or dark, those two barrels will taste different. And so being able to achieve that kind of variability in something like this is what gives you the tools to create self-expression. And whatever you're aiming for, that self-expression will then go into it. And then in the end, you're kind of projecting what you want to finish with. And you can control that variability. You can't control it. You can influence it. You kind of guide it. And so when these barrels start taking off and they start going crazy, based upon temperature, based upon what your acid is in it, due to precipitation or not, or if you want to use what IBUs you want to, because you're trying to get something that's more neutral based and you don't want any acid in it, or you want low acid stuff to blend out stuff, or maybe you're getting some things. It's really about the uniqueness of doing that. And so after all that, to answer your question, I've created a couple lanes of series of things that I think that they mean a lot to me, and I think they're fun. So I've got like a fruited sour base, right? Whether it's like a Creek or a Framboise. I have those things that are traditional, and I do those every other year because I don't want to get stuck in the traditional. But I think I love raspberries like everybody else. I love raspberries. I also love apples, right? And so I've got another series that's kind of like a cider hybrid. I kind of relate to people that, like pet nats. It's kind of like a pet nat kind of thing, but there's really no names for the styles that I have except for just long names of what they actually are. And then I also really like grapes. And I think there's an expression to grapes that can be celebrated, local grapes and grapes from other places that people identify with. And I think that those are personal identifications. And so I do a white, a red, I do at the end of the year for a celebratory beer, I do it one more step further. And then I do like a white or red or what I want to do with something else. Last year, and then all my barrels are from France, and so they're French Bordeaux barrels. And so I give them all French names because the one thing that I don't want to distract from, kind of trying to like create this feeling is any kind of legalness with names. And so I just use French names because they're not taken. Please don't take any more names if you are doing that. So like Le Bois de Rêve, Champs de Framboise. Like I just really, and so it's funny. I was in Belgium.
Cultural appropriation.
It's so funny. Here's a funny story. I was actually, I was invited to be part of the Leuven or the Hoften Dormal Invitational. And this guy goes up to me and he's like, oh, Champs de Framboise. He's like, and I go, oh, Champs de Framboise. He goes, what? No, it's pronounced this way. And I was like, oh no, it's like this. And he goes, an American telling a French guy to speak French. And I was like, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to offend. But like, it's kind of fun. It's about the story and it's about where they come from. And it's really about making these things. For example, one of the beers that I have with me is Vie de Fête. It stands for party life. It's a good feeling. And I don't know any French. I just know what the bottles are, but they have a lot of names that mean something. They mean a feeling, like bon nuit is like have a good night, but not like have a good night like you're going to bed, just like have a good evening, and I really am drawn to the artists then of having that. Soleil means sun. And so like with these things, I try to incorporate their name into the beers. And so Soleil, for example, was a Sauv Blanc that was in a barrel for must that I blended with one of my spontaneous. And then what I did is I took that, and after that was finished after a year and a half, I blended that to where it would match kind of like that more like pear apple that you get from like Sauv Blanc. And then I also took that another extent and I put that on oranges, Satsuma oranges, which if you've ever had a Satsuma oranges, it's the best orange you could have because it tastes like pineapple. Like it's so juicy. It's basically that orange when you go to like Whole Foods, and then it's the orange that has the stem and the leaf on it. and then they're just really expensive, but I only need some. And so I conditioned that for about 8 months, and it gave us like citrusy, beautiful, fruity, Sauv Blanc flavor. And there was nothing else I've ever had like it. And like when I do combinations like that, or even like with, these ciders, like if you can take the blends that you get from these barrels and you can make it taste like an actual apple, like not like an apple that tastes like apple and blonde, or like, like that artificial apple, not necessarily as bad as like something tasting medicinal, but like when you're like, it's harvest day, it's October, I'm going to grab that apple and take a bite of it. And if it tastes like an apple, that's what I'm going over. It's like the realism of the thing. And what do you do that with? I mean, you do it with like mixed cultures. You get the whole complexity so that when you actually blend them, you can like really represent anything you want. I have barrels here that taste like pineapples. There's no pineapples in them. There's no mango. I got barrels that taste like all sorts of things, and they're amazing. And it's hard because as I'm blending, like I try to get done with 12 a year, but it's hard to do 12 a year when I'm brewing at Pryes so much. But when I try to do with these is I try to make them so that I celebrate them. And so when I actually, it's hard to use them because I love the barrel so much. And so I'm like, oh, I'm not going to use that yet. But like, you have to use it.
You got to make a beer with it.
You got to make a beer with it.
So I'm curious about this. You want to achieve some flavor goal, but naturally you're also having to work with wild cultures that are doing what they want to do in the environment that you're creating for them. You can move them and help massage them in certain directions, but you can't tell them what to do because they're, they will not necessarily obey your orders in the way that, say some more monocultural yeast fermentations will, are much more capable of being controlled. So how then do you work through this? Like, how have you gone through and developed the cultures that will create some of these flavors? How do you then, keep fostering those so that they'll continue to create those kinds of flavors? And then, where's that, is it a process of, oh wait, this is now tasting this way. It's going to inspire me to then add to it, in this kind of way to create something from it? Or, is it more, I'm going to massage this culture to produce, this flavor in this specific way so that I can create this other thing that I want to create?
So it's like, it goes back to like having that flavor, that whole library of flavor, and having such a diverse library to choose from has allowed me to,
how many cultures do you have rolling around in here? Ballpark.
I don't know, 40, probably 40 different ones.
Okay.
And then basically what's happening is I can, anytime that I want to steer something in a direction, it's maybe a room change. Maybe it's that I take something out of it or I use it and I know this barrel's great. And so then I'll just do a different type of, maybe I'll change the wort that I put in there. And what that can look like is, so for example, say that I don't want an acid, right? I don't want something that's going to produce a lot of lactic acid or something. And so what I'll do is I'll actually make it so that I'll just increase my IBUs. Obviously, with spontaneous, we all use aged hops for the most part. I know that I listened to a couple of your shows and people are talking about using your own hops or using hops from BSG. I like BSG's hops that are aged. The reason why is because I don't have a lab to tell me what my acids are. Aged hops don't have any alpha in there or lack of alpha, so use beta, but it's still nice to measure when I'm looking at what I want to do on the very specific, we'll call it computer way. Because if I want something that's going to be less acidic, I want more of a bacterial shield against that. And so you're looking at probably like increasing the IBUs to like, 12 to 14 within that batch. If I want it to kind of go hog wild and do whatever it wants to, you're looking at about 10 IBUs. And it still allows me to have that beta, that acid, that bacterial resistance towards it. But it's a way for me to kind of get what I want in what I'm lacking or in my library, and then kind of continue from there.
Pretty narrow window between party time and lockdown.
Yeah, I mean this is true, but you'd be, if you taste the difference of the batches, you'd be amazed at how actually 4 or 5 or even 6 IBUs will actually change. And while you can do a change and like I'll end up growing my own hops. Like I said, I grew hops at my old house and I moved because I had children, but like I'm going to grow hops again. I just don't know where to put them because I know where I plant them. They're going to be there forever. And so like, I'm just holding off on doing that. And so I will eventually do that. But those beers that use those hops on whatever I do, those are going to be just a little bit different. You know, those are going to be, you know, different batches that are just going to kind of do whatever they want to do, you know, and I'll just have to do a variable thing. And I don't really, if I'm brewing my own hops to do that, I'm not going to really care about how many IBUs are in there. Like I'm just going to, it'll be just more fun, you know, and see what happens. And either the flavors are made or no, they're not.
Sure. So, you know, within this kind of sphere, how much of the beer here at Idyll Forest is, say, spontaneously fermented? And then we can talk about some of what your approach to spontaneous fermentation looks like and how, you know, where that aligns with certain Belgian process or may diverge from that. How much of that is mixed culture? And then how much of that is basically non-beer type fermentation?
So we're probably looking at about half spontaneous.
Yeah.
The time at which I can do spontaneous is a kind of a slim window. I have to have a day that I can just do one turn at Pryes, which makes it very difficult because I'm usually, you know, making 2,000 gallons and I don't need 2,000 gallons in one quick go at. So that makes it difficult. But more or less speaking, though, when I actually do the batches and to get them changed, the control really comes to the mixed culture, and the spontaneous makes it happen. Gives me the variability, which is really fun, along with the mixed culture. But it's about half and half. And the big thing about that is just really about, you know, there's a couple different views actually the way you can look at it. Spontaneous it's really healthy in its environment. I mean, it's living here, otherwise we wouldn't be living. I think that, you know, lab, you know, bacterias and funguses that we use, like we'll call it like, you know, lab pitches of mixed culture. We are removing that from the area where they extracted it from. And I think that there's almost like a thinner flavor to it, but I actually like that because it's fun for me to kind of like pull that out where, I mean, the spontaneous is in its world all by itself. Like it just changes. And actually it's so crazy sometimes when you have it, it just like the change of temperature will actually change the flavor and the aromatics week to week. It's crazy. And so like that variability is kind of fun.
Week to week.
Like depending on where it is, absolutely. There'll be something and I'm like, this is wonderful. And then I don't know if I just drank coffee that day, but I'm like, what happened to this? And then a week later I'm like, oh, it's great again. So it's very different. And by the way, I don't drink coffee. So, it's just, it's fun, but they definitely, it allows me to kind of do both of them. Thinner flavors, more craziness happens. The spontaneous, I know some brewers are really like, apprehensive about getting into spontaneous. I think my spontaneous stuff actually is healthier and it has more character to it. And I think that
these claims are not FDA supported yet in terms of,
right.
We're not making a health claim here.
That's right. But I'm also in an area that I'm in a temperature controlled environment in this space. And so that allows me to, you know, give it a healthy start. And there's things that we do technically to the wort to make it so that my spontaneous does survive and produces a good product. That's not saying that I haven't dumped stuff. I've dumped my share of stuff. It's very true what everybody says. You will go through stuff and some things just don't turn out, and that's fair. That means that a different war was won in the barrel, and it's not the good one. But
it's the brutal side of natural selection here.
It's very much.
When you say you're working on the wort in order to help it survive, I assume you're talking about pre-acidification there.
Mm-hmm. So when you're doing something like spontaneous, we're just taking like basically the most, you know, sensitive, anything can fall into it, sugar water, and it will start just fermenting, right? And so the things that we do to make that so that it has more of a defense to guide it in the right direction. Obviously, we talked about putting hops in it. So like they are aged hops. We do go through like a 2 or 3 hour boil to drive off all that cheesy tones to it because I don't want the alpha. I just want the beta. And so depending on what I'm looking for, I'll, you know, adjust the IBUs for that. I will then take that and then I'll pre-acidify it. So that means like adding like lactic acid to it or something to drop the pH so low that when I'm bringing it actually into the cool ship, it has more of a chance to ward off bad molds.
What's that goal pH there? What, mid fours or?
Yeah, it's like 4.2. I think if my memory is right now. I just want to make it really low so that it really just has a better chance to ward off things and kill things that are going to be more acceptable to it during those times.
This is a controversial topic, even amongst lambic brewers, and different brewers have different opinions. You can go back and listen to the episodes that I've done with Jean Vanois of Cantillon and Pierre Tilcan, and they have different opinions about this kind of approach to pre-acidification, and so I wouldn't say that the subject is settled. There's just a range of opinion on it, but you find that for you, that's the process that works.
If that's what I want to do, right? Like I also don't pre-acidify stuff. So like, remember my flavor wall?
Yeah,
I want all of it.
Okay,
I want to see where it goes. And so in order to do that, you have to do all the things, and then you basically just learn it yourself. And so based upon my experiences, I would say that the things that I've dumped the most are things that I haven't pre-acidified. The things that have we'll call it like 2-3 years have stood the time has been pre-acidified stuff just for that extra spontaneous.
So you've done the work.
I've done,
and you've checked.
That's
checked
correct.
The math.
I've experienced them and tasted them.
Interesting. Within the kind of cultured side of the project, with all of these, maintaining 40 cultures and keeping that kind of thing healthy, I can see why you spend a lot of time here, in addition to your normal day job at Pryes. What are some of the other levers that you pull within those? I mean, obviously there's a pretty consistent temperature here throughout the barrel cellar. So that's something, and it's indoors and temperature controlled. And so it's not as if that's going to shift a ton, through seasons. Are there other levers that you pull to kind of steer the direction once fermentation is underway on those?
Oxygen is bad.
Yeah.
Right. Like the one thing, if you historically taste through farmhouse breweries or even some lambic breweries, I've spent a lot of time in Belgium. Like this year I'll be going there for probably 10 days and I'll just be trying what they're doing. And you kind of get, and it's not good or bad.
Me too. Actually, I'll be there before this episode actually airs.
Oh, awesome. I'll be there later this year in October. But it's about perception and what you want. Blending is a very personal thing.
Right.
It's really about what your expression is to people. And if they like it, then you should try the other things that they do. And that's the difference between this and like making a hazy IPA. I mean, the blend is very different. What you put into it, the percentages, what you do, you're going to get something in the end. And really based upon what your experience is will help define what course you want to take, because you feel like it's going to turn out a certain way and it could be a lot of wasted time. And so you want to just make sure that everything is purposeful. You just don't want to just do something. You just want to do it on purpose so that you learn something from it or you make an adjustment towards it. And those are just really big lessons that I've learned over the past 3-4 years. And it's been fun. And, when people do, when you try a bunch of different stuff, one thing that I realized at a very early time is that, when you look at Acetobacter, it is a definitive flavor throughout all Belgium that either you like it or you don't, right? I would say that because we have more, we'll call it passive flavors here in America, we don't want anything that will give you more fatigue on your palate. We don't like vinegar in our beer. We don't like the flavor. And so the biggest drive to that is obviously oxygen. And so I would say that, when doing something like this, to really get to the flavor and not have that. You can always have something have that. If you ever want to add more of that to that, you can control that. But in the barrel world, you are against that 100% and you're battling it. So whether or not you top off or you don't, or you just lock it in when it's done fermenting and you stop it forever, those are just different things that you have to, on a barrel by barrel basis, and really understanding what you're kind of going after. And half the time, just go after something different. Go after a flavor like, this is new. I'm going to keep going on this one. I don't want to change this one, because one thing that Acetobacter will do is it'll take over.
Sure. Now, obviously, since this is a smaller project and part of Pryes, and as you said, it's not one that you can brew 2,000 gallons of in a day, because that would fill up more than all of the tank space in this small place that we're in right now. Is there say a commonality to wort base that you then pitch onto different cultures at the same time. If you're pulling out a larger batch, naturally off of a 15 barrel system, you're not necessarily wanting to make 15 barrels of the exact same beer, just given the commercial realities as well as the creative output that you're looking to achieve. And so you want to build some things that can also move in different directions. How do you think about building base beers then that are going to go through these longer fermentations?
So I do. And so basically what I brew is I brew 4 batches a day, right? So 4 turns, if not more, but really right now we're just in 4 turns. And what I'll do is in that time is I'll actually do 1 turn. So if you're doing like a kettle sour or something, sometimes I just fit it in. So in a faster day, so typically you make a kettle sour, you put it somewhere and then you put lactobacillus in there and then you let it go. So in that same day, since you're not doing a whole boiling process, you're just heating up, quick boil, whatever, you have a lot of time that day. So either I'll fit it in sometimes.
You'll make like saison or spontaneous wort just because you've tied up the system on making a kettle sour.
Yeah, and usually
smart. Right. Look at that.
Yeah.
Making it work for you.
Yeah, that's right. But it's just fitting it in gaps. Or maybe it's like a shutdown day where we just like today's our maintenance day and we'll just do a bunch of stuff and maybe we'll just come in and just brew and like I'll just push like the least amount I can through my system, which is I can probably do like dealing with my bed in my lauter ton. So probably like the lowest I can probably do is like about 12 barrels. And so I'll take that and I'll put that in IBC and brew that for my day. And then what that requires to do that is a lot of planning. And so what I'll do is I'll make it so I use all of that up. And so I will just do it independently. None of the brands that I have play into this role based upon IBUs or, what the content of it is. So the recipes are on purpose. They are a lot of the essence of what my recipes do is they really are traditional lambic influenced. And a lot of my back knowledge is really just looking at heritage and trying to innovate and push those forward.
Let's talk about, let's fast forward to the fun and sexy part of all of this, past some of this mechanical stuff and start talking about the way that you think about the process behind adding different fruits, different flavors, spices, et cetera, and then pulling, the funky beer, this kind of, fermentation and acid forward beer together with, these fruit flavors to help create the end product that you're looking for. Talk to me about that process for you.
Well, first,
it probably starts with sourcing ingredients and thinking about those things. But how does that work for you?
Really, it really turns into. It starts out at inspiration. Like at my house, I mainly do most of the cooking at my house, and so for my family, so I'm cooking for 4 people every single night, and sometimes I get in a rut. Right? Like, am I going to eat chicken again? Am I going to eat salmon again? Like, what are we going to eat today? Like, I get in a rut. And so it's the same thing applies to here. Like, souls of inspiration are a big deal. And the barrels inspire me. And so sometimes I'll taste something and I was like, I'm going to add the fruit to this. I can taste this. I'm going to add the fruit to this. I want to emphasize this. You know what I want to do? I want to add some of this to it. Maybe I just want to use coriander for a little bit. But I don't want the cracked pepper of coriander. I don't want the tropicalness of it. So I'll grind some coriander and I'll dip it in there and I'll steep it in for about 4 hours, pull it out. And then tomorrow I'll do it again. And then I'll do it again. And to get different things in different varietals. And so I'll start creating layers and then maybe it goes somewhere and then I want to add something else to it. So maybe I'll pull some off of a barrel and then maybe I'll finish that, let that go, let it condition because it'll start like another fermentation for a little bit and let that go. And I'll keep checking the gravity to see what's happening. And right now we're usually at like 0 at 1, just flat. And then I'll figure out what I want to do, or maybe I'll start another project at that time and just I'll allow the inspirations from the barrels to kind of take it. And then I'll source stuff. Also you mentioned sourcing stuff. Sometimes you find yourself in a place where you can't get anything, and you're ready and that's not available to you. And so based upon, what's in the season. So like maybe, like I talked about doing a creek, like all my cherries are from like 5 of my friends' houses. And like in the front of my house, I have a 6-year-old Montmorency cherry tree. In my backyard, I have a Balaton cherry tree. I also believe in having an edible, useful yard. So I I planted currants, so I've got the pink champagne, and then I've got a standard currant, and then I just I think that utilizing those things are also act as inspiration for what I want to do, and the experience that I can create for somebody to enjoy, and those are things that inspire me.
And also wine grapes, and grape wine beer hybrids, play a big part, especially using grapes that are native to the upper Midwest region. Talk about the process of using those, because now you're also getting into the way that winemaker approaches to using fruit and the way and that kind of intersection with beer. Talk to me a little bit about that.
So there's a local vineyard here that I go to, and they tell me when the grapes are ready, because they know, because that's what they do professionally. And so
what grapes do they grow?
Many varieties, right? And so I would say that Minnesota has, based upon my experiences, Minnesota has fantastic white grapes, but their red grapes they don't have the tannin that we get out of like California grapes. So I really kind of focus on, for my local stuff, I focus on the white grapes. And so, for example, the one that we're trying right now is the Prairie Star. I would say it has, when you get it off the vine, it kind of tastes like cotton candy. It's a little bit sweeter. But that's great for me because that allows me a lot of play. So what I'll do is I'll go, just to kind of put this towards another beer, compare this to like a Sauv Blanc. Like this is my like local Sauv Blanc, but a little bit more, not more sweet, but more on like the pear side. And it's really, I think it's a lovely grape. I'm a huge fan. But basically I'll go and they'll tell me when the peak time is. So they'll do, they take it and put the grape, get the juices, tell me what the bricks are, and say, these are the high bricks. These need to get picked in the next couple days. And so I'll look at my schedule, and that's obviously late fall. And so then I'll go pick my grapes, and I'll take those grapes.
You pick them.
I pick them, they pick them, their team picks them, we all pick them. It's it's a lot of grapes.
Takes a lot of people.
Takes a lot of people. And so we pick the grapes, and then I'll take them and put them in my blue bins so the spiders don't, infiltrate my car and live in my car for a couple of years. And then I'll take those and I'll bring those back to Idyll Forest, and then I'll crush those. I won't crush them. I will lightly crush them, right? And I'll put a blanket of CO2 and do carbonic maceration on them. I really feel that when I don't do carbonic maceration, I just don't get the depths of flavor that I want. And so after 4 or 5 days, you're literally eating a carbonated grape. It's just crazy. And so there's like a little fizz to it and stuff. And they're not rotten. They're not rotting because we have CO2, and CO2 is produced on them. And so you put a cover on them. And then at that time, then I'll juice them, and then I'll put those in a barrel. And then I will have already beforehand figured out what I want to encourage that and support that in its growth. So there is live, we'll call it floria on the grape skin. And there's also, you're talking about thiols and stuff, and then there's also a direction that I want to bring them in. So then I'll choose like a barrel or a foeder or whatever the combination is to support them in their journey. And then I'll let them ferment out for a long time. Initially, there's a good fermentation happens right away, probably after we'll call it if not the next day, for the next 4 or 5 days. And then it settles down, and then Brett takes over. And the combination between Sack and Brett starts creating these, kind of takes the esters that Sack makes and just makes this beautiful fruit deflavor. And those two together just do such a great job. And then they go until they're done. And then I just pull gravities and I try them, figure out where they're at, and then blend them again or not blend them again.
Blend them again. How do you make that kind of creative decision?
It's a creative decision. Depends on how I'm feeling that time. It's also that's one of those personal things I was referring to. It's really about how you feel. What are you trying to do? It's not just it's not a machine. It's like, do I want people to get more funky? Do people want less funky? What do I want them to do? I'm going to release this after sitting in a bottle for 8 to 10 months. I'm going to release this during the spring. I want something lighter. It's probably going to get hot. The climates are changing. It's probably going to be really hot. I'm going to get something lighter. There's a lot of things that go into it. What do I want to drink during that time? And you just kind of make the decision based upon what you are. It's just like going to a restaurant. You go to a restaurant, when do the salads come out? It's when it's warm. How many people really drink lemonade in the winter? I'm sure lemonade sales are down, and then when it's hot out, then you want that. So you want to, being a kind of like a white, we'll call it like a citrusy kind of fun grape like this, it's going to be spring. So I want to keep it clean.
Sure. Was there, have you ever had some experiences where in your testing blends, you found something that was unexpected or that kind of changed your perspective on the way that some of these flavors can work together? Or, as you're blending, were there some just really beautiful things that came together in different ways than you might have thought when you at the outset of that?
Everything you just said. I put things together and the outcome was something so incredible that I was like, this is going to get entered into FOBAD and it's going to win an award. Or if I have something that did not work. One thing is, even ingredients wise, like I made a basically a picha, like a peach beer with lambic, like traditionally. And then I was like, I'm going to put some things like, I'm going to push it a little bit. I wanted to taste more of this mallow kind of flavor, this vanilla flavor. So I put vanilla beans in there. That does not work out. I'll never do it again. Like vanilla bean and lambic it just doesn't work out. And maybe some people like
lambic inspired beer.
Thank you very much. Lambic inspired beer. It just has a flavor that, due to what Brett does, it has a flavor that is pronounced more with something like vanilla bean that is less desirable to me. And so I've learned not to go that route anymore.
Interesting. Is it just like that mineral character that doesn't play well, or it ends up being more medicinal vanilla? Or
it's worse than all that.
Sure. What do you, from all of this, what have been some of your favorite blending strategies and some of the things that have come across? Because of course, finding, blending towards an idea flavor is one thing, but also, finding the ways that interactions happen, but also working within, the scope that you have to from a production environment, because maintaining half barrels of something here isn't going to work very well to, hit your oxygen or low oxygen goals. And so, you also have to think in bigger numbers. You also have foeder beer that, can play a big part in some of these blends that also then gets, high pointed or accented by some of your barrel, smaller barrels. All these kinds of things work together. Talk to me a little bit about how a lot of your blends come together like that.
So it's really about staying true. So like, because I come from a clean brewery, I'm pretty disciplined on what I'm going after. And so I often write down what I'm going after to be more organized, because maybe I come into work tomorrow and it's raining and maybe I'll change my view. But if I'm thorough, like I have, as you can see, I have notes on every barrel here. Some haven't been touched for a while because they're still going through it, but some of them have, 2 years worth of notes. And so, I know, and they have grades on them of what I like, and kind of point me in a direction. So if I want something that has a certain flavor, I'll know what it is. But if I have a flavor or an inspiration, I will jot it down and I'll write the notes on what I'm going after. And so it allows me, with the focus that I'm going to achieve that. And then through the process, it's like it shines. It's like I have a bunch of halves and quarters and stuff. And then once it kind of goes through the chaos and it kind of meets each other, like then its true flavor comes out. And sometimes it's amazing. Like most of the time it's amazing if I did my work right. And then we're just lucky enough, and sometimes it doesn't work out. And that's just something you have to understand with this. But what's also nice is if I'm holding myself to I'm trying to get a release every month, that I'm trying to do more than just 12, right? I'm trying to do more so that I can just not do so. Like, these aren't working out. It's time to move on. If it doesn't taste good after 12 months, it's true what they say. It's time to move on. If it doesn't taste good after it's done, you can wait longer. You can definitely do that. But like, say it's 3 years and you're waiting, it's not going to happen. So yeah, it's really about staying true, staying organized, understanding what your personal mission is and what you're trying to express to somebody, and really being true to what your project is. Sure.
Well, we've been talking for a while here. Let's zoom out. Looking at Idyll Forest in the scope of Pryes Brewing as a whole, it's part of the entity, but it's a small kind of labor of love portion of the creative process, of a laboratory that you get to focus on flavor in, but not it's not driving the bus of the overall brewery. You know, the Pryes brands are the things that you make the most of way, you know, by far.
Yeah.
It is a fun project that, again, you know, keeps the spirit of experimentation alive for you and connects you back into this history of brewing, you know, and such a beautiful tradition there. What do you hope to achieve with Idyll Forest, and what is the long-term goal for Pryes as a whole?
I hope that this supplies diversity to flavors and makes it so that, you know, I think that a world full of just the same thing is just kind of boring. And I think that experimentation and innovation drive craft. And I think that this is the future. And I know that it takes a long time, and some of these flavors are more abrasive than others. But I think that also there's a time where you can only drink the same thing with a different hop for so long, or it's just the same. I think that when you go to a restaurant and you order your main meal, it is an extension of your meal. It is not only your main course. It is not your appetizer. It is a thing that takes you through your entire meal. And I think that experience is really special. And I think that, like, I'm honored to be able, when people say this is amazing, I mean, I'm really honored that people really enjoy this, you know, this flavor, or like this, what this reach kind of does. So
cool. And what do you hope to achieve with Pryes as a whole?
We're going to be a brewery forever, you know, forever. Like, I think that, you know, I want Pryes to continue to achieve a great brand recognition, to create good things that people can identify with, and in a space that allows people to feel really safe and welcomed to. And I think that those things are really, really special in the time, especially in the day and age that we live in right now. And we do that with our tap room within the spaces that you can go sit at wherever you want to go, and or the shows, concerts. And so as far as the beverages go, something that you can relate to, and something that's new, and something you're used to, you know, so kind of the whole spectrum.
Cool. Well, I think that's a great place to bring this to a close. Choose G&D chillers on your next expansion or brewery startup and receive 1 free year of remote control and monitoring. Take your operations to the next level with the experts at ProBrew. Old Orchard is the go-to source for fruit-forward ingredients for some of the bigger names in the craft brewing landscape. Omega Yeast's Diacetyl Knockout series is comprised of 8 familiar yeast strains engineered to knock out the formation of diacetyl before it starts. ABS Commercial are proud to offer brewhouses, tanks, keg washers, and preventative maintenance parts to brewers across the country. Join Yakima Chief Hops on August 28th through 30th for Hop and Brew School, a one-of-a-kind educational experience in Yakima, Washington. And if you're a distiller or curious about it, check out the Craft Spirits and Distilling podcast. If you've enjoyed this one or any of the other episodes we put out there, go to beerandbrewing.com. Click on that subscribe button. Support what we do in bringing you great content through all of our magazines, podcasts, videos, everything else. But it's your subscription that helps make that happen. Jeremy, if people want to learn more about Pryes, both in the digital space and say come visit you and taste some of the Pryes beers and the Idyll Forest beers in person, where do they find you?
We're basically downtown Minnesota. We are located right on the banks of the historic Mississippi River. And if you're downtown, it's just to the west. And we've got a huge patio. It's enjoyable. It's awesome throughout all summer. It's huge. And inside we have bands and stuff, and it's really fun, and feather bowling, and you can have all Idyll Forest and Pryes beers there.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing your approach both to Midwest IPA and your FOBOB winning mixed culture, spontaneous, and fruited beers. It's been really fun to see the inside of the Idyll Forest lab here and get a deeper picture of the beer they're brewing. Cheers.
I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
This podcast has been brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those who love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.